It may sound impossible at first, but there is a path for the Falcons to make a big, bold trade for A.J. Brown or DJ Moore to solve their wide receiver woes.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network in all of North America. And of course, I'm your humble host, Aaron Freeman, been covering the Atlanta Falcons for 2 decades, formerly at FalcFans.com. RIP, still going strong here on Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. And on today's daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, we are talking about the potential path for the Falcons to free up just enough cap space and acquire just enough draft picks that they could make a big, bold splash trade at wide receiver, and why A.J. Brown and DJ Moore would top their wish list if they were able to pull that off. And this basically came to me as I was scrolling through The Athletic and looking at their various combine coverage across the league. And, you know, some of the things that jumped out to me were all the potential players that were on the trade block or potentially cap cuts. And, you know, I don't think this is that realistic at the top. I'll say that. This is more of a thought experiment, especially in light of hearing Ian Cunningham talk today about, you know, the Falcons going through the exercises of trying to figure out ways to add more picks, because we know that is going to be a priority for him to increase their pick number, where he basically said publicly, like, this is the last time we're ever going to have 5 picks. Right now, we'll see if they can achieve that dream in 2026, but certainly they will set themselves up for success in 2027 and beyond. And that's what we like to hear. But let's break down the path where the Falcons can acquire the draft capital in order to make a big, bold splash move at wide receiver. And it starts with a tag and trade with Kyle Pitts, right? That would free up more than $15 million in cap space, right? We previously said the projected hit on the franchise tag on tight ends is $16.3 million. Current over the cap.com projections, that's where that number came from, is putting it at somewhere between $15 and $15.5 million. So you would free up that type of cap space. You would get a draft pick back, and then you would potentially flip that draft pick to a new team, or at least shore up your own draft position so that you could flip maybe other picks to that new team to get that wide receiver. And other players that the Falcons could explore, you know, trading this offseason. You know, I don't think any of these guys are going to net the same return that you'd potentially get on Kyle Pitts. Like, I think there's a realistic world where you get a 3rd round pick for Kyle Pitts in a tag and trade, but other players that could, in theory, be shopped by the Falcons: Jake Matthews, Jessie Bates, Darnell Mooney, Caleb McGarry, Mike Hughes, Charlie Warner, Clark Phillips. Bates, to me, is the only one that really jumps out on that list that has significant trade value. My best guess is maybe you get a 4th for him, right? And I'm basing that off of the fact that Kevin Byard, when he got traded by the Titans, and he was like 30, and Bates is like 29 now. But when he was traded by the Titans to the Eagles back in 2023, the Titans were able to get a 5th and 6th round pick for Kevin Byard. And I'm thinking maybe you get a little bit more than that. Maybe Jake Matthews could be a 4th for a team that's really desperate at left tackle. And there's a number of teams out there that are potentially, including one of the teams that we'll be talking about, potentially the Falcons acquiring a wide receiver from, which is the Chicago Bears, later in today's episode. But hypothetically, if we're sitting here saying, okay, we're trading Pitts and Jessie Bates, you net a 3rd and 4th round pick via those trades. Those 2 moves combined would free up about $22 million in cap space. And that's basically what it would cost to fit DJ Moore, the Bears wide receiver, under your salary cap. And we'll talk about why he's at the top of the wish list, as well as A.J. Brown, as well as some other players and wide receivers that are potentially on the trade block this offseason, but why I don't necessarily, you know, play out this game with those guys. And we'll do that as we wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. So it is draft season, and yes, the combine is here, but we're not talking about NFL draft prospects today. We're talking about the 5-hour energy flavor draft. We're going to be breaking down some tasty flavors, which are the best, which just might be sleepers. The board is set, the flavors are ready, and only one is going to take that top spot. 5 Hour Energy has a wide variety of flavors. They have something for everyone. I know when I used to stroll back into a gas station in the morning before my old day job, I'd grab a 5 Hour Energy, and it was just basically berry and grape were the only flavors. They're classic, but they've leveled up in the year since. 17 flavors now. Peach Mango is now my top spot with its sweet tropical flavor that's going to take me away, and I definitely want to try the Confetti Craze flavor, the sweet birthday cake inspired flavor with buttery, freshly baked confetti cake, vanilla frosting, and that sprinkle of sweetness in every sip. So who's number one on your board? Find your new flavor of 5 Hour Energy shots available online at 5hourenergy.com or Amazon. And it is also a new year and you want to simplify. And one way you can do that is with easy, reliable dinner plans. And that's why I want to tell you about today's sponsor, Home Chef. Home Chef is going to take the stress away from cooking by delivering fresh, pre-proportioned ingredients right to your door with easy-to-follow recipes that actually taste great. They're rated number one by users of other meal kits for quality, convenience, value, taste, and recipe ease. And it's easy to see why their meals are going to come ready to fit your schedule. They have a wide variety of options from family-sized meals to quick lunches, and there are plenty of options that fit different dietary choices. And also, if you're looking to save time and money, Home Chef has got you. Customers save an average of $86 per month on groceries. So for a limited time, Home Chef is offering my listeners 50% off your first box plus free shipping plus free dessert for life. Just go to homechef.com/lockedon. That's homechef.com/lockedon for half off your first box, free shipping, and free dessert for life. Must be an active subscriber to receive that free dessert. And of course, the pressure is sky high in the NFL. And so it is in your workplace. You got deadlines, overflowing inboxes, and that one position you have to fill sitting wide open like Drake London on an option route. But when the pressure is on and you need the right hire, Indeed is all you need. Indeed sponsored jobs are going to help you reach the right people who actually fit what you're looking for, the right skills, experience, and location, so that you're not just hiring the right candidates or not just hoping the right candidates stumble across your post. Over the next minute that I'm talking to you, companies like yours will have made 27 hires on Indeed, according to Indeed data worldwide. So if you're hiring, spend less time searching and more time interviewing candidates who check all your boxes with Indeed sponsored jobs. Get a $75 sponsored job credit to help give your job that premium placement it deserves at Indeed.com/podcast. Just go to Indeed.com/podcast right now and support the show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? This is a job for Indeed sponsored jobs. So one of the things that we will probably see develop over the course of the next couple of weeks is there's going to be lots of receiver options that are potentially on the cut block or the trade block this offseason. But 7 names I've seen, at least as far as trades go, that I've seen consistently floated out there as potential trades when I've just basically Google, like, who's going to get traded this offseason, right? It's A.J. Brown, it's DJ Moore, it's Brian Thomas Jr., George Pickens, Jalen Waddle, Keon Coleman, and Michael Pittman Jr. Now, I'm going to eliminate Coleman and Pittman right off the start because their skill sets far too much overlap as big slot receivers when it comes to Drake London. Pickens, I'm also going to cross off the list. You know, he's going to be franchise tagged. And even though there are reports that the Cowboys will at least listen to offers, I don't think they're actively seeking out a trade. And then Brian Thomas Jr., right? He makes a ton of sense, right? But he's young, he's cheap. But because of that, I think there's potentially going to be a bidding war for his services if he is on the trade block. And I don't think the Falcons, with their limited draft capital, even if they acquire more, are likely to win that. Like, I basically imagine that if the Jaguars are going to trade him this offseason, it's only going to be if someone offers them a first-round pick and whatnot. And I think there's a similar conversation with Jalen Waddle, the Dolphins wide receiver. You know, he's clearly their number one wide receiver. He has 3 years left on his contract. So there's really no pressure for them to move off of him at this point in time. And so that kind of, to me, really leaves A.J. Brown and DJ Moore that are the most plausible in this very hypothetical, implausible situation as we're talking about with the Falcons making a big, bold trade. And, you know, the DJ Moore connection is fairly obvious. Obviously, Ian Cunningham, coming from Chicago, knows him well. A.J. Brown, of course, has been a bit of a problem child over the last year in Philadelphia. DJ Moore, you could argue, has also been the same in Chicago, but not to the degree of making as many headlines as AJ Brown has been, making a stink about his situation. But I do think AJ Brown, at least as far as any of these guys are concerned, is the best possible fit that you could find opposite Drake London, right? AJ can do it all. He's that big X wide receiver that can command safety help, which is going to create opportunities and openings for Drake London on the opposite side. And he's also one of the top deep threats in the NFL. Very good after the catch, even though that hasn't been fully on display in Philadelphia. What I think that's owed more to their sort of static routes concepts as opposed to him losing a step in that regard. And to me, the combination of AJ Brown and Drake London is basically like Julio Jones and Roddy White 2.0, right? And we got shafted on that Dimitrov dream back in the day, right? We only got really 2 years of that in 2011 and 2012. And then injuries derailed things in 2013. And then that plus old age had Roddy being a shell of himself in 2014 and 2015. So we had those guys playing together for 5 years, but we only really got 2 years of them at their peaks. And really, you weren't getting peak Julio in his rookie year. He played really well in like 6 games that year. But other than that, like you only got 1 year peak, that combination. Now, the issue when it comes to trading for either Moore or Brown is money, right? You're going to have to take on a lot of money on the remainders of the contracts, right? Basically, Moore, if you acquire him via trade, he's going to have like 4 years left on his contract, including this 2026 year. And I believe if my calculations are right, he's going to be paid nearly $94 million for the team trading for him. And the Falcons, in this case, would have to absorb. That's almost $23.5 million per year. AJ Brown has 4 years left on his deal. I think it's only about $80 million that you have to absorb, but there's like $50 million in like void money that's kicked down the road because the Eagles basically do the same stuff cap-wise that the Saints do, and they've kicked that. But I don't know exactly how it works, but I'm assuming that the Eagles would still be responsible for eating all that if they were to trade A.J. Brown. And that complicates the A.J. Brown trade because it really only makes sense for the Eagles financially to trade A.J. Brown after June 1st. Go listen to our most recent episode where I broke down dead money and post-June 1 moves when talking about Kirk Cousins' impending release to further understand that. And it's basically all that restructuring and kicking the can down the road is going to make the dead money hit too much for the Eagles to reel it. They're going to have to just basically eat a bunch of cap space. They're going to lose cap space by trading him before June. And that alone kind of makes, if we're talking hypothetically again, of the implausible, the DJ Moore trade seems a little bit more plausible. Again, given the Ian Cunningham connection, given that you can make that move, as early as 2 weeks from now, when the league year starts, as opposed to waiting, 4 months or whatever it is, 3.5 months. And also, I think the general perception that DJ Moore could settle in as being the number 2 to Drake London's number 1, right? Especially in a world where we're expecting Drake London to get paid like a number 1, right? And we're imagining a world where, again, I'm projecting like $33 million on Drake London's contract per year. And if that were to happen, and you had AJ Brown on your roster, I would expect AJ Brown to immediately decide to hold out, right? At least that's the vibes I get from AJ Brown, where it's like, no, I'm not going to be the second highest paid wide receiver on any team that I play for, right? He's a high maintenance player by all accounts, and when he's producing and when your team is winning, no problem with AJ Brown, and he's going to be a big part of that. But when things aren't necessarily going his way, when he's not getting the targets and the team isn't winning games, he has been known to be a little bit of a problem. Now, I say that not as if DJ Moore is known to be a low maintenance player in that regard, right? But I imagine he's less likely, again, maybe I'm wrong, he'd be less likely to make a stink about being the second highest paid wide receiver on any given roster. But maybe I'm wrong in that. But, ultimately, I know all of this is more fantasy. Ultimately, this is all purely hypothetical. When we talk about DJ Moore getting traded, I see a lot of people saying oh, he'll go to Baltimore. They need a wide receiver, or, they always are looking for wide receiver help. Declan Doyle, the former Bears OC, is now the OC there. So there's a natural connection there. I saw an ESPN article last week that had 4 different trade proposals for AJ Brown from the Bills, the Ravens, the Browns, and the Patriots. And I doubt we're going to get any articles, with trade proposals that involve the Falcons, whether it's for wide receivers or any real positions this offseason due to their limited draft capital as we sit here and their limited cap space as we sit here today. But again, as I said at the top, those things could change. But, you've heard me say about how the Falcons could kind of rebuild their skill position group around Bijan and Drake, and particularly their wide receiver core around Drake, and offset some of Drake's weaknesses and add guys that, have strengths in areas where Drake isn't as strongest. And to me, basically, this was just a reason for me to sit here and say, like, I think A.J. Brown is that ideal player, right? If you're looking for the deep threat, check, right? He's been one of the best in the league. You're looking for that yak monster, check, right? You're looking for that outside X wide receiver that allows you to continue to move Drake London all around the formation, in the slot, on the outside, all that sort of stuff. But that X is just going to be static on his side of the field, and you can do 3-by-1 stuff and all this stuff. Like, A.J. Brown checks that box, right? And then, if defenses are like, oh, we got to double Drake London, right? We got to give him safety help, and you leave a cornerback one-on-one with A.J. Brown, he's going to burn you. He checks that box, right? And then if you're like, okay, well, we got to give safety help to A.J. Brown's side of the field, and then that leaves Drake London one-on-one, and he's going to burn you. And again, A.J. Brown checks that box. And so to me, A.J. Brown is the perfect wide receiver to put across from Drake London. And of course, you're saying, of course he is, Aaron, because he's a top 5 wide receiver. Of course, who wouldn't want 2 top 5 wide receivers in their offense? And of course, obviously. But, it does beg the question of, should the Falcons invest that much resources at their wide receiver position from the draft capital, and including the money, especially when you don't necessarily have a quarterback? And, I think a lot of people's response to that is like, well, you'll find out if you got a quarterback, because if Michael Penix or whoever you put at quarterback can't work with this wide receiver duo, he can't work with anybody, right? But generally, I tend to be more on the, let's find the quarterback first and then let's add the weapons, as opposed to vice versa. But I can certainly understand why, you would pounce on this opportunity if it was presented to you, especially if you were able to get A.J. Brown for like a bargain. If basically the Eagles were like, he's been too much of a problem, we'll give him away for like a 4th round pick. Again, I don't think that doesn't seem likely, especially with Howie Roseman. You're never going to win a trade against Howie Roseman. Maybe Ian Cunningham has the secret sauce from working in that organization that he can figure out a way to trick Howie, but unlikely that you're ever going to win a trade with Howie Roseman. So, ultimately, I think the Falcons will focus on wide receiver in the draft, going for cheap guys that will offset the impending cost of Drake London. But I'm curious what your thoughts are, right? Not in the terms of like how realistic, big, bold trade for A.J. Brown or DJ Moore or anybody else is. But, do you share in the fantasy, right? When you lay down your head at night and you're just like, what are you fantasizing about? We don't kink shame here on the podcast. So if you share in our fantasies, we can do that. And I know some of you guys were already writing your comment about how, your thoughts on it. And then I made it weird. And you're like, I'm not going to write that comment now, Aaron. You made it weird. And I'm like, I'm sorry. That's what I do. But please provide your feedback. As weird as I tried to make it here at the end of this episode, I'm just curious, what are your thoughts on it? Even if we all know that it's not realistic, it's just like, what are your thoughts on the possibility? If we're just, sitting here just fantasizing about, the perfect wide receiver. Do you agree that A.J. Brown is the perfect wide receiver? Is there somebody else that you think is the perfect wide receiver? So welcome all your feedback on that. But we will be back with more draft coverage around the combine, and maybe we'll talk more about, these hypothetical, implausible scenarios for big splash trades at other positions that the Falcons could make. Max Crosby's out there. Is there a world where the Falcons could trade for Max Crosby? Maybe that will be a topic of future discussion. So continue to make Locked On Falcons your first listen. Check us out on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Check out Locked On NFL Draft to get the latest on the combine's comings and goings, as well as Locked On NFL. And of course, there's no off season for the everydayer. Check out an ad-free version of Locked On Falcons, premium Discord access, all at the link in the description below at lockedonfalcons.supercast.com, as well as other perks for $5 a month or $50 a year. It's all part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every